Better Call Saul is one of those shows that feels almost too realistic. The lawyers actually talk like lawyers, the scams are carefully planned, and even the criminal world seems to follow its own believable logic. But that realism can be deceptive. The writers deliberately bend reality when it makes the story more intense, and some of the biggest moments in the series would be extremely difficult to reproduce in real life. Here are 8 of the most shocking examples. The first lie is Jimmy's ability to manipulate the legal system. Jimmy McGill is obviously intelligent, but the show sometimes makes it seem as if a clever lawyer can simply find one loophole and completely destroy an entire case. His courtroom speeches, surprise revelations, and psychological tricks are incredibly entertaining. But real criminal proceedings are much more rigid. Evidence has to be disclosed, witnesses are subject to strict rules, and judges have enormous control over what can actually happen in their courtroom. Jimmy repeatedly gets away with tactics that would likely lead to serious professional consequences if a real attorney used them as frequently as he does. The most unrealistic part isn't that Jimmy is a clever lawyer. It's that he can constantly push the boundaries of legal ethics without immediately losing his license or destroying his career. The second lie is Mike Ehrmantraut himself. Mike is portrayed as an extremely experienced former cop who can investigate almost anyone, break into locations, conduct surveillance, and anticipate what criminals are going to do before they do it. But the series also gives him an almost unbelievable ability to remain invisible. Mike can spend hours watching people, following vehicles and investigating dangerous criminals without anyone noticing that he is there. In reality, surveillance is much more complicated. Modern cameras, license plate recognition, phones, witnesses, and basic human suspicion create countless opportunities for someone to get caught. Mike is essentially written as a man who makes almost no operational mistakes, even when he is dealing with people who are actively looking for threats. That's great storytelling, but it is much closer to a spy thriller than ordinary criminal surveillance. The third lie is Gus Fring's ability to hide an enormous criminal empire behind a fast food restaurant. Gus doesn't just sell drugs. He manages suppliers, distribution, money, employees, and an organization that eventually becomes incredibly large. Yet his public life remains almost perfectly clean. That's where the show quietly asks you to believe something extremely difficult. The larger a criminal organization becomes, the more people have to become involved, and every additional person creates another potential source of evidence. A massive operation would generate financial records, transportation records, communications, suspicious employees, and countless opportunities for investigators to connect seemingly unrelated events. Gus's intelligence makes his operation believable, but the level of control he maintains over it is heavily exaggerated. The show basically gives him the ability to eliminate almost every possible weakness in an organization that should have hundreds of them. The fourth lie is the superlab. This one becomes even crazier when you actually think about how the laboratory was constructed. The finished facility looks like a hidden room underneath an ordinary business, but creating something that enormous underground would require a huge amount of work. Excavation, construction, electrical systems, ventilation, plumbing, and specialized equipment all have to be installed before the laboratory can even function. That means workers, contractors, deliveries, and machinery have to be involved. Even if Gus carefully controls the project, keeping the real purpose of a facility like that secret from every person involved would be incredibly difficult. The show makes the construction look almost invisible because the audience only sees the finished result. In reality, the construction process itself would create an enormous trail of people and information. The fifth lie is Nacho's ability to survive between two extremely paranoid criminal organizations. Nacho isn't simply working for one side. He is constantly trying to protect himself while dealing with the Salamancas and the wider cartel world, all while keeping secrets from people who have very good reasons to suspect everyone around them. The problem is that criminal organizations built around violence and distrust aren't particularly forgiving when somebody behaves strangely. A single suspicious conversation, unexplained disappearance, or inconsistent story can completely change how someone is treated. Nacho survives because he is smart, careful, and extremely good at improvising, but the number of times he gets dangerously close to exposure is far beyond what most real people could survive. The show turns his life into an incredibly precise balancing act where one mistake could end everything. The sixth lie is how organized the cartel world appears. Better Call Saul presents powerful criminal families almost like corporations. There are bosses, territories, trusted employees, and clear chains of command, and characters often seem to know exactly who has authority over whom. Real criminal organizations can certainly have hierarchies, but they are rarely this clean. They are full of competing interests, personal relationships, corruption, informants, and people who don't always follow orders. The Salamancas in particular feel almost like a criminal dynasty operating according to a strict family structure. That's what makes them so memorable, but it also makes the criminal world easier for the audience to understand than the chaotic reality would actually be. The seventh lie is Jimmy's transformation into Gene Takavic. The show makes disappearing seem surprisingly achievable if you have the right connections and enough money. Jimmy changes his appearance, adopts a new identity, and starts living an ordinary life. But completely disappearing from modern society is much harder than television suggests. Financial activity leaves records, employment creates documentation, government databases exist, phones and electronic devices generate information. Security cameras are everywhere, and even something as simple as interacting with a bank or medical provider can potentially connect you to your previous identity. Jimmy's biggest advantage is that everyone assumes Saul Goodman is either dead or gone, which gives him an enormous head start. But maintaining that new identity for years without accidentally leaving a trace is still far more difficult than the show makes it look. And the eighth lie is the biggest one: Saul Goodman surviving as long as he does. Jimmy doesn't simply represent criminals. He repeatedly places himself directly between violent criminals, drug organizations, law enforcement, and people who would have very good reasons to make him disappear. He knows things he shouldn't know, gets involved in schemes that could expose everyone, lies to people who are capable of killing him, and repeatedly gets second chances after making enormous mistakes. The series makes his survival feel logical because Jimmy is incredibly adaptable. But realistically, a person operating that close to so many dangerous people would eventually run out of luck. One client could betray him, one investigation could uncover his connections, one conversation could be recorded, or one mistake could put him in the wrong place at exactly the wrong time. And that's what makes Better Call Saul so clever. The show doesn't need to completely invent its world to fool you. It takes things that are possible, adds a huge amount of realism, and then quietly pushes them beyond what would actually be believable. That's why you can watch an entire episode thinking, this could really happen, until you stop and realize that almost every character has survived situations that should have ended their story years ago.